The sudden death of a familiar face from film and television always sends a ripple through the culture. But when that person spent years publicly wrestling with the very struggles that may have contributed to their passing, the loss lands differently. That's the case with Hayden Panettiere, the actress who grew up on screen in front of millions of viewers and later became one of Hollywood's more candid voices on mental health, addiction, and grief. Her death at 36 has left fans, colleagues, and investigators trying to piece together a story that, even now, remains only partly told. This is what has actually been confirmed so far. Not speculation, not invented detail, but what law enforcement, medical examiners, and people close to her have said on the record. On the afternoon of Sunday, August 16, 2026, police and emergency medical crews responded to a 911 call reporting an unresponsive woman at a residence in Greenville, South Carolina. The call came from an apartment complex on Easley Bridge Road, where Panettiere had reportedly been staying temporarily. Dispatchers were told the woman was in cardiac arrest. When first responders arrived, they found Panettiere unresponsive and began advanced cardiac life support. Despite those efforts, she could not be revived. She was pronounced dead at the scene at 2:32 p.m. She was 36 years old. In the hours that followed, the Greenville County Coroner's Office confirmed her identity and the basic circumstances of her death, but stopped short of naming an official cause. That distinction matters, because in the days since, a great deal of reporting has focused on details that sound dramatic, but haven't actually been confirmed by anyone in an official capacity. An autopsy was completed the day after her death, on August 17th. According to the coroner's office, that autopsy found no signs of trauma that contributed to her death. In other words, whatever happened, it doesn't appear to have involved a physical assault or external injury. Beyond that, officials have been notably restrained. The coroner's office has said her official cause and manner of death remain pending further investigation and completion of additional toxicology studies. That's a standard, often lengthy process, and it means that weeks, sometimes months, can pass before a final determination is made public. Anyone claiming to know the definitive medical cause of Panettiere's death right now is getting ahead of what investigators themselves have said. One detail that has circulated widely and understandably fueled public concern involves dispatch audio from the day she died. That audio, obtained by outlets monitoring emergency radio traffic, reportedly referenced a possible overdose and CPR in progress. It's an important piece of context, but it is not the same thing as a confirmed finding. Authorities have not said an overdose caused her death, and as of this writing, they haven't addressed that detail directly at all. What we do know is that the investigation has grown more serious in scope. Later in the week following her death, the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration joined the case, according to sources cited by multiple news organizations. The Greenville City Police Department remains the lead agency, with the DEA assisting. A representative for Panettiere's family said only that there was nothing to share while the investigation continued, adding that they were hopeful justice would ultimately be served. That federal involvement doesn't confirm any particular cause of death on its own, but it does signal that investigators are treating the circumstances with real seriousness. Police records reviewed by news outlets indicate that Brian Hickerson, Panettiere's on and off partner, was present at the scene when she died. According to a statement from his brother, Zach Hickerson, Brian administered Narcan, the opioid overdose reversal medication, after the two of them found her unconscious that day. That detail, if accurate, would suggest that whoever was present believed in the moment that an overdose was a real possibility, even though officials have not confirmed one occurred. Hickerson's presence in Panettiere's life has itself been part of the public record for years, and not always in a straightforward way. In her memoir, published earlier this year, Panettiere wrote about a relationship marked by both connection and serious harm. She described at least 3 separate incidents in which Hickerson was arrested after physical altercations between them, including one on Valentine's Day 2020 while the couple was vacationing in Wyoming. Hickerson was ultimately convicted in 2021 on 2 felony charges related to injuring a spouse, cohabitant, or partner tied to conduct dating back to May 2019, and was sentenced to 4 years of formal probation. In a television interview this past May, ahead of the memoir's release, Hickerson acknowledged one of those incidents directly, saying he had been drinking and got physical with her, leading to his arrest. He referred to the domestic violence chapter of her book as my chapter and said everyone should read it. That a man with that history was reportedly the person who found her and who administered a life-saving medication is one of the more complicated threads in an already complicated story, and is a detail investigators are almost certainly weighing as part of the broader picture. To understand why this loss has resonated so widely, it helps to remember just how long Hayden Panettiere had been part of the public consciousness. She began acting as a child, appearing in numerous television roles before she was even a teenager, and by her early 20s, she became one of the more recognizable young actresses of her generation. She's probably best remembered for playing cheerleader-turned-superhero Claire Bennett on the NBC series Heroes, a role that made her a household name during the show's run in the mid-2000s. She later starred as an ambitious young country singer on the ABC musical drama Nashville, a part that let her combine acting with genuine vocal performance over several seasons. Her film work included the ice skating drama Ice Princess, the cheerleading sequel Bring On, All or Nothing, and a return to Scream franchise in 2011's Scream 4. She also lent her voice to the character Kyrie in the Kingdom Hearts video game series, a role beloved enough that when actress Alison Stoner eventually took over the part, Stoner still referenced Panettiere directly in her tribute after the news broke, writing about the two of them sharing one sky, one destiny, a nod to the game's own language, beyond her scripted work. Panettiere used her platform for causes she cared about. She was a long-time and vocal advocate for whale conservation, working with organizations opposed to commercial whaling, and she also voiced support for Washington, D.C. statehood. One of the district's non-voting congressional representatives, Paul Strauss, said after her death that she always tried to use her platform for causes she believed in, and that he was devastated by the loss. What set Panettiere apart from many of her peers wasn't just her resume, it was her willingness, later in her career, to speak openly about things most people in the industry keep private. She disclosed that she experienced postpartum depression after the birth of her daughter, and she has said that struggle played a role in her decision to give up custody of her daughter in 2018. That's an extraordinarily difficult thing for any parent to share publicly, and she did it at a time when postpartum mental health was still rarely discussed in mainstream entertainment coverage. She also spoke, starting around 2022, about a long secret battle with opioid and alcohol addiction, a struggle she said she'd been managing privately for years before deciding to talk about it publicly for the first time. Addiction recovery is rarely a straight line, and Panettiere never claimed otherwise. What she offered instead was honesty about how hard the process actually is at a moment in her life when it would have been easier to say nothing at all. Any account of Hayden Panettiere's life has to include her younger brother, Jansen Panettiere, who was also an actor. Jansen died suddenly in February 2023 at his home in Nyack, New York. He was 28. The family later confirmed that his death resulted from cardiomegaly, an enlarged heart, combined with complications involving his aortic valve. It wasn't a condition anyone seemed to know about beforehand. In the family's public statement at the time, they described Jansen as someone whose charisma, warmth, and compassion would live on in the hearts of everyone who knew him, and they asked for privacy as they grieved. For Hayden, the loss was uniquely devastating. As the older sibling, she had spent her life feeling responsible for him, and she later said as much directly, describing it as something she'd always considered her job. In interviews afterward, she was unusually candid about how his death didn't just wound her emotionally, it changed her physically. She described developing agoraphobia in the aftermath, becoming afraid to leave her home, and said her body reacted to the grief in ways that altered how she saw herself, including significant weight gain that she struggled to make peace with when she looked in the mirror. She eventually credited a structured workout routine, arranged through her team, with helping her regain a sense of control and slowly begin confronting that fear of the outside world again. It's worth sitting with that timeline for a moment. In the span of about 3.5 years, Panettiere lost her only sibling to a sudden, undiagnosed heart condition, wrote and published a memoir processing years of trauma, and then died suddenly herself under circumstances that are still being investigated. That's an enormous amount of loss and reckoning packed into a short stretch of one woman's life. Earlier this year, Panettiere released her memoir titled This Is Me, A Reckoning. In it, she wrote, candidly about growing up as a child star, about motherhood and the guilt and grief tangled up in her custody decision, about her mental health, and about losing Jansen. She also detailed the domestic violence she experienced in her relationship with Hickerson, giving readers a far more complete picture of what she'd been living through during years when the public mostly just saw headlines. Friends who saw her in the weeks around the book's release describe her as quietly proud of the work, if guarded about what would come next. One person close to her recalled seeing her at LaGuardia Airport that May, ahead of the memoir's release, and said she seemed to be keeping things low-key, no big public reveals, no denials about anything in the book, just what was described as a knowing, telling smile. The reaction to her death was immediate and widespread. Colleagues from across her decades-long career shared memories publicly. Britt Shaw, who had a guest role on Nashville, described the shock of the news and recalled how welcoming Panettiere had been on set, saying she had a way of making people feel like they belonged from the moment they arrived. Allison Stoner's tribute carried a particular weight. Given the connection to their shared Kingdom Hearts role, Stoner wrote about the loss with visible emotion, extending condolences to Panettiere's family and to what she called the many lives Hayden reached. Fans, for their part, gathered both online and in person. Mourners left flowers near the Greenville apartment building where she died, a small, physical gesture of grief for someone most of them had only ever known through a screen. On social media, tributes mixed nostalgia for her most iconic roles with genuine appreciation for how open she'd been about her struggles. For a lot of people, that honesty had made her feel less like a distant celebrity and more like someone whose pain and recovery they recognized in their own lives. It would be easy in a moment like this to fill in the blanks, to assume the dispatch audio confirms an overdose, to assume the toxicology results will show what everyone suspects, to treat federal involvement as proof of foul play. But that's exactly the kind of narrative building that officials, and frankly Panettiere's own family, have specifically pushed back against. The truth is that as of now, the manner and cause of her death are still officially unresolved. What's confirmed is this. She was found in cardiac arrest, resuscitation failed. The autopsy found no signs of trauma. Dispatch audio referenced a possible overdose without that being confirmed by investigators. Narcan was reportedly administered at the scene, and the DA has joined a police-led investigation that remains active. Everything beyond that, specific substances, specific medical findings, a definitive cause of death, is still pending. That distinction isn't just a technicality. Getting it wrong, or reporting invented specifics as fact, does real harm to a family that has now lost 2 children within a few years of each other and is trying to navigate an active federal investigation in the middle of public grief. Whatever the final findings turn out to be, they won't be the whole story of who Hayden Panettiere was. She was a working actress for essentially her entire life, moving from children's television into some of the more recognizable film and TV roles of her generation, and doing it while living with challenges that she eventually chose to discuss openly rather than hide. She was a mother to her daughter, Kaya, whom she shared with her former fiancé, boxer Vladimir Klitschko. She was an advocate for causes outside the industry that mattered to her personally. And in her final months, she was a memoirist, willing to put years of private pain into a book that readers could actually learn from. Her death, whatever investigators eventually determine caused it, adds her to a difficult and familiar list. Public figures whose visible success masked struggles that never fully went away, no matter how much they worked to manage them. What made Panettiere somewhat different is that she didn't let those struggles stay entirely hidden. She talked about postpartum depression at a time when very few actresses did. She talked about addiction after keeping it quiet for years. She wrote in detail about domestic violence she survived, and she talked about the specific, physical toll of grief after losing her brother, the agoraphobia, the weight gain, the process of slowly finding her way back out into the world. That kind of openness doesn't undo the pain behind it, and it certainly didn't prevent this outcome. But it does mean that the conversation her death has reopened about addiction, about domestic violence, about the aftermath of sudden family loss, about mental health care access for people whose lives are lived partly in public, is a conversation she was already having, in her own words, before any of this happened. As the investigation continues, more will likely come out through the coroner's office, through the police, through the DEA's involvement, and possibly through people who knew her. when that information becomes official. It deserves to be reported accurately and with the same care her family has asked for since the day she died. Until then, the responsible thing is to sit with what's actually known, resist the pull toward invented detail, and remember a woman whose work and whose honesty reached far more people than the headlines from this past week can capture on their own.